The heavy ceiling fan in my Miami living room hummed with a monotonous, low rhythm that usually put me to sleep on hot nights. But that specific night, the air felt unusually thick and suffocating. It had been 3 long days since I last heard from my only son, Richard. He called me every single Sunday without fail, even during his busiest weeks as a top financial consultant at his firm in the city. Those 3 days of silence weighed like heavy stones in my chest, and I had already tried calling his personal number several times with no luck. When the clock finally struck midnight and my phone vibrated on the coffee table, my heart didn't just race. It felt like it hit a solid brick wall. The caller ID displayed Beatrice, my daughter-in-law, and I felt an immediate, sharp pang of intense dread deep in my soul. I answered with a trembling hand, fully expecting a simple apology for Richard's long silence during the busy week. Instead, I was met with a voice that was as cold and lifeless as a winter morgue. "Mary," Beatrice said, her tone sounding like she was merely reading a boring weather report. "Richard died yesterday morning in a car accident on the highway to Key West. The car caught fire instantly. He is already gone." I felt the hardwood floor evaporate beneath my feet as the world turned gray. I tried to scream, but only a hollow, painful wheeze escaped my lungs. "Why are you only telling me now?" I managed to gasp out through my sudden tears. Beatrice just sighed, the sound of calculated annoyance hitting me hard. "I've been incredibly busy, Mary. There were police reports, insurance documents, and many lawyers to deal with all day. You really have no idea how much exhausting work it takes to organize a proper burial on such short notice," she added coldly. Before I could even process the horrifying image of my son trapped in a burning car, she dropped the second blow. "He's already been cremated. It was entirely my decision. Richard always said he wanted it that way, so I simply fulfilled his last wish without any unnecessary delay." My blood turned to ice in my veins. Cremated? How could he be gone so fast without a single chance for me to say a final goodbye? As I sobbed into the phone, Beatrice continued with a terrifying lack of any real empathy. "One more thing, Mary. Richard updated his official will 6 months ago. He left absolutely everything to me: the golf club house, the expensive cars, and the life insurance. You have no right," she claimed. "I had no legal right to a single cent of his estate," and told me the funeral service was scheduled for 10 a.m. the very next day. She warned me strictly not to make a dramatic scene in front of her prestigious family. Beatrice hung up the phone before I could even ask about my beloved 8-year-old grandson, Kevin. I sat in the darkness for an hour, clutching the device until my old knuckles turned bone white. Something about the situation felt profoundly wrong and staged. The suspicious speed of the cremation, the immediate mention of the will before the body was even cold, and the utter lack of grief in her voice were red flags. It felt like a carefully written script for a poorly acted play designed to erase my son's legacy. I tried calling Richard's number again, desperate to hear his voice on the machine, but the line was dead. I looked at a framed photo of him and Kevin on the mantel, and the heavy silence of the large house became almost deafening. Around 12:15 a.m., a faint, rhythmic scratching sound came from the very back of the house. I froze in place, my pulse thundering in my ears like a drum. No one ever used that back door. It led to a dense patch of palms and was always secured with heavy deadbolts for my safety at night. Scratch, scratch, thud. I grabbed a heavy glass vase from the table, my legs shaking uncontrollably, and crept toward the dark kitchen. "Who's there?" I whispered into the shadows, my voice failing me. A rasping, agonized voice drifted through the thick wood of the door. "Mom, it's me. Please, open the door right now." It was a barely audible whisper, but it was the most beautiful and shocking sound I had ever heard. I fumbled with the heavy locks, my fingers numb with pure shock and adrenaline. When the door finally swung open, I staggered back in disbelief. A man stood there, swaying on his feet, leaning heavily against the wooden frame. He was covered in thick, dried blood and black soot. His face was a tragic mosaic of dark bruises, with one eye swollen completely shut, and his clothes torn into dirty rags by the roadside brush. "Richard!" I shrieked, catching his heavy frame before he collapsed onto the kitchen floor. He weighed so much, but I found a sudden surge of physical strength I didn't know I still possessed at my age. I dragged him into the center of the kitchen and locked the door behind us immediately. As I pressed cold, wet towels to the deep, bleeding gash on his forehead, he grabbed my wrist with a weak but very desperate grip. "She tried to kill me, Mom!" Richard coughed out, his breathing ragged and shallow. Beatrice and her secret lover, Andrew. It was all a cold-blooded setup for the massive insurance money. Tears of hot rage and overwhelming. Relief blurred my vision as Richard slowly told me the nightmare he had lived. He had discovered Beatrice's affair weeks ago and confronted her, hoping they could fix the marriage for Kevin's sake. Beatrice had feigned deep repentance and asked for one last long drive to save their marriage and talk things through. Instead, she drove him to a secluded, dark road where Andrew was already waiting with a heavy metal pipe in his hands. They beat him without mercy until he stopped moving entirely. They then threw him into his own car, doused the interior with gasoline, and pushed the vehicle off a steep ridge. "They thought the fire would finish me off for good," Richard whispered, his voice cracking with pain. But the violent impact with the trees woke me up just in time. I managed to crawl out through the broken glass before the gas tank finally blew. I spent hours hiding in the thick brush, watching them celebrate my death from a distance. He had walked for miles through the night, avoiding any hospitals where they might look. He knew he had to reach my door to stay alive. I looked at my son, broken, bleeding, and scarred, and I knew right then that Beatrice had made a fatal mistake in her plan. She had left alive the only person in the world who could truly destroy her. I spent the rest of the long night nursing Richard as best as I could. I couldn't risk taking him to a local hospital yet because Beatrice had eyes and connections everywhere. I used my old first aid training from years ago to carefully butterfly stitch his forehead and splint what was clearly a fractured right arm. By 5:30 a.m., he finally fell into a restless, twitching sleep on the living room sofa. I sat by his side, watching his chest rise and fall, thinking of the earlier phone call from Beatrice. She firmly believed she was now a wealthy widow. I decided to let her enjoy that feeling. At 6:30 a.m., my phone rang again on the table. It was Beatrice, forced my voice to sound weak, high-pitched, and tear-strained. "I'm coming to the funeral," I whispered, pretending to be broken. She sounded tired, but clearly satisfied with my response. "Good. Remember, the service starts at 10 a.m. sharp. And Mary, try not to cry too much. It's very bad for Kevin's fragile mental state right now," she added before hanging up. I hung up the phone, my jaw aching from the suppressed fury I felt. I left a quick note for Richard. "Stay hidden. Don't answer the phone for anyone. I'll be back by noon. I love you more than anything." The cemetery chapel in Miami was crowded with Richard's colleagues and many friends, all dressed in somber black. In the center of the room sat a sealed, ornate casket topped with a photo of Richard smiling warmly. It was the same photo I had on my mantle at home. It was all a disgusting lie, a hollow box designed to bury a truth that was currently breathing and sleeping on my living room sofa. Beatrice was in the very front row, a thick black veil obscuring her face. She was leaning theatrically into the arms of total strangers, sobbing loudly for everyone to hear. I watched her closely through my dark sunglasses. Every fake sob she let out felt like a physical slap to my face. When the priest spoke of Richard's tragic and sudden departure, Beatrice wiped her eyes with a lace handkerchief. I caught the briefest glimpse of a satisfied, cold smile when she thought no one was looking at her. Then I saw him standing at the back, a tall man in a sharp, dark suit. Andrew. He and Beatrice exchanged a brief, knowing look of triumph. I chose not to follow the somber procession to the crematorium. I feigned a sudden, dizzy spell and sat down on a stone bench outside the chapel. As the mourners slowly cleared out, I saw Beatrice meet Andrew in the far corner of the parking lot. She handed him a thick, heavy envelope, likely a down payment on his services. Then, to my absolute horror, they kissed right there, just yards away from the empty casket. I recorded every single second of that kiss on my smartphone from behind a large oak tree. I finally had the motive recorded on video. Now I just needed a full confession to finish them. When I returned home, Richard was awake and staring blankly at the floor. "She kissed him at the cemetery, didn't she?" he asked, his voice sounding hollow. I nodded silently and showed him the clear video on my phone screen. His hand tightened on the sofa cushion until the fabric groaned under the pressure. "We need much more than just a video of a kiss, Mom. We need undeniable proof of the actual murder plot." "She's smart. She just claimed she was grieving in a friend's arms." Then I remembered something Richard had mentioned months ago, the family cloud account they used for all their bills and household photos. Beatrice thought Richard was dead, and that all his personal devices had been destroyed in the car fire. She wouldn't expect him to log in from my old, dusty laptop. With shaking hands, Richard entered the secret password. He quickly found exactly what we were looking for, an archived message folder containing months of secret conversations with Andrew. The messages were truly bone-chilling and evil. "The brakes are too risky. Just use the metal pipe," Beatrice had written in one text. "The insurance company pays double for an accidental death in a fire," she noted in another. They even discussed my grandson, Kevin. Beatrice planned to send him to a strict boarding school in Europe to get him out of the way so she could travel the world with Andrew and the $10 million payout. Richard started to shake. They were going to discard his only son like common trash. We spent the entire afternoon printing out every single message and creating a detailed timeline of their long betrayal. I called an old family friend, a retired police investigator named Miller. He came over immediately, and when he saw Richard sitting there, a man he thought had been turned to ash, he nearly had a heart attack on the spot. "We need to catch them in flagrante," Miller said, his eyes sharpening with professional focus. "The insurance company is releasing the full funds to her bank account this coming Friday. That is exactly when they will meet to split the money. We set the trap for Friday at a very high-end hotel in downtown Miami." Beatrice had reserved a luxury suite under a false name to celebrate the start of their new life. Richard would stay hidden in a monitoring van with the police team, watching the room through a tiny pinhole camera we managed to install while the maid was cleaning earlier. I was tasked with the most difficult part of the plan, staying perfectly quiet and letting the professionals do their work. But Richard had another idea that scared me. "I want to be the one who opens that door," he whispered. Friday arrived with a tropical storm that painted the Miami sky a somber purple. Inside the hotel room, the air was cold and sterile. Beatrice arrived first, carrying a designer suitcase filled with the $5 million in cash she'd withdrawn that morning, exactly half the payout. Andrew was already there, pouring expensive champagne. "To the perfect crime," he toasted. Through the monitoring screens in the police van, we watched them laugh about Richard's unbelievable clumsiness. Beatrice sat on the bed, running her manicured fingers through the tall stacks of $100 bills. "I had to endure 7 miserable years with that complete idiot," she laughed. "He was so boring, always working, always talking about our future. He deserved that pipe to the head." She said he was too predictable to live. Detective Miller signaled the rest of the team. It was finally time. A loud, demanding knock at the suite door startled them both. "Room service," a muffled voice said from the hallway. Andrew walked to the door, looking annoyed at the interruption. "We didn't order any." He didn't even finish the sentence before the door was kicked inward with extreme force. The heavy wooden frame shattered as police officers swarmed the room with guns drawn. They were shouting for everyone to get on the ground immediately. Beatrice screamed at the top of her lungs, throwing the cash into the air as if she could somehow hide behind the flying money. As they were being handcuffed on the floor, a tall figure stepped through the chaos into the bright light of the room. He was wearing a dark hoodie, his right arm was in a medical sling, and his face was still deeply scarred and bruised. Richard slowly pulled back the hood. The silence that followed was absolute and heavy. Beatrice's face went from pale to a ghostly, translucent white. She collapsed onto the side of the bed, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Richard? But the fire, the ashes. The ashes in that expensive box belonged to someone else, Beatrice. Or maybe they're just empty, like your heart, Richard said, his voice level and terrifyingly calm. Beatrice immediately tried to blame Andrew, screaming that he had manipulated and forced her into the plan. But Andrew just spit at her feet in disgust. "She planned every single detail, officers. She was the one who bought the gasoline." As they were led away in handcuffs, Beatrice looked at Richard with a sudden, searing flash of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You should have died in that car," she shrieked as the elevator doors closed. Richard didn't even flinch at her words. The trial that followed was the media sensation of the year. The man who came back from the dead was on every front page across the country for weeks. Richard testified with a calm dignity that made even the coldest jurors weep in their seats. The digital evidence, the cemetery video I recorded, and the hotel confession were a triple seal on their dark fate. Beatrice was sentenced to 28 years in prison. Andrew was given 25. The judge also ordered the immediate return of every single asset and sent to Richard. Justice was finally served. But the greatest victory wasn't about money or jail time. It was the moment I drove Richard to pick up Kevin from his maternal grandmother's house. The poor boy had been told his father was a ghost. When he saw Richard walking across the lawn, he dropped his toy car and ran, screaming, "Daddy!" with a force that broke my heart and healed his at the same time. They hugged for a long time. We decided to sell the house in Miami and the luxury villa at the golf club. Too many dark shadows and bad memories lived there for us to stay. We bought a bright, airy home on the coast of Georgia instead, where the air always smelled of salt and the only noise was the gentle sound of the waves. I moved in with them, taking over the large kitchen and making sure Kevin always had his favorite cake. Richard started a successful new firm, one that focused specifically on helping families protect their valuable assets from predators and fraudsters. Years later, Richard met and married a wonderful woman named Paula, a kind teacher who adored Kevin and respected our difficult history. I watched them at the altar, with Kevin standing proud as the best man, and I realized something profound about our journey. Beatrice's evil attempt to destroy us had actually forged our family into something unbreakable and strong. She had tried to kill my son, but instead, she had made him realize exactly what was worth living for in this world. Every single night before I go to bed, I look at the photo of us, three, Richard, Kevin, and me. We are all smiling, with the blue Atlantic Ocean in the background. It's a constant reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed by lies, is ultimately inevitable. I am Mary, a survivor, a mother, and a proud grandmother. I have seen the darkest parts of the human soul and also the brightest. And I know, with absolute certainty now, that love is the only fire in this world that can't be put out by any amount of gasoline or greed. We are finally at peace. Sometimes, in the quiet of the Georgia evenings, I think back to that midnight call. It was the start of a nightmare, but also the start of our true life. Richard often says that the fire didn't kill him. It burned away the person he used to be, someone who was too trusting and blinded by a false love. He is a different man now, stronger and more aware of the beauty in every breath he takes. Kevin has grown into a resilient young man. He knows the truth about his mother, but he doesn't let it define him. He sees the strength in his father and the devotion in his grandmother. We have taught him that the world can be dangerous, but that there are always people who will fight for the truth. He is our greatest treasure, the living proof that hope can survive even the most brutal betrayal. Paula has been a blessing to our home. She brought a new light into Richard's eyes that I thought was gone forever. She doesn't try to replace what was lost. She builds something new with us. On Sundays, the house is filled with laughter and the smell of roasting chicken. We are a real family now, built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. The past is a shadow that only makes the present look brighter. The Richard Morales Foundation for Victim Protection has helped hundreds of people since it opened. Richard uses his financial expertise to track down hidden assets and expose those who prey on the vulnerable. He often speaks at conferences, sharing his story not for pity, but to empower others. He is a voice for those who have been silenced, a champion for justice in a world that often feels unfair. I still have the recording of that kiss in the parking lot. I keep it in a secure digital vault, not to watch, but as a reminder of the day the truth began to win. It was the moment I stopped being a victim of Beatrice's lies and became the architect of her downfall. I learned that age doesn't make you weak. It gives you the patience to wait for the right moment to act. Beatrice wrote a letter from prison once. She claimed she was sorry and asked for a visit from Kevin. Richard and I sat down and discussed it for a long time. We decided that Kevin would make that choice when he was an adult. For now, we protect his peace. We don't hate her anymore. Hate takes too much energy. We have simply moved on to a place where her words can no longer reach us. Andrew didn't last long in prison. He was involved in a fight and didn't make it. When we heard the news, there was no celebration, only a quiet acknowledgement that his journey had ended as violently as it had lived. He was a pawn in Beatrice's game, a tool she used and then discarded when things went wrong. His life was a cautionary tale about the high price of greed. The sea glass Kevin collects on the beach reminds me of us. Broken pieces of glass, tossed by the rough waves and ground by the sand, until they become something smooth and beautiful. We were broken by the betrayal, but the process of healing has made us unique and valuable. Every scar on Richard's face is a story of survival, a mark of a man who refused to stay dead. On my 75th birthday, Richard gave me a locket with a photo of the three of us on that first day in Georgia. "You saved me, Mom," he whispered. I told him that he was the one who did the hard work of crawling out of that fire. I was just the one holding the door open. We are a team, and we always will be. The bond between a mother and her son is a force that even death couldn't break. The Georgia sun is warmer than the Miami heat, or maybe it just feels that way because my heart is light. I spend my afternoons in the garden, growing herbs and flowers. It's a simple life, but it's the one I always wanted. I am no longer waiting for a phone call that might bring bad news. I am living in the news I made for myself. I am Mary, and I am finally, truly home. Richard's new firm has grown so much that he's opening a branch in Atlanta. He wants to reach more people, to create a network of protection that spans the entire South. He is driven by a purpose that is larger than himself. He knows that his second chance at life is a gift, and he intends to use every second of it to make the world a little safer for families like ours. Kevin is starting high school next year. He wants to be a lawyer, to fight for justice in the courtroom just like Detective Miller did. He has a keen sense of right and wrong and a heart that is full of compassion. We are so proud of the man he is becoming. He is the future of our family, the one who will carry our story into the next generation with pride and integrity. Paula and I have become close friends. She asks me for recipes and advice, and I listen to her stories about the school. She is the daughter I never had, the one who brings balance and grace to our lives. She loves Richard with a purity that Beatrice could never understand. Their love is a quiet fire that warms the whole house, a steady light that guides us through any storm. Looking back at the years, I see that every challenge we faced was a lesson in disguise. The betrayal taught us about loyalty. The pain taught us about resilience. The loss taught us about the value of what we have. We are not defined by what was taken from us, but by what we chose to keep. We kept our love, our dignity, and our truth. And that has made all the difference. The Atlantic Ocean is a constant presence in our lives now. Its vastness reminds me that our problems are small in the grand scheme of things. But its power reminds me that we have the strength to change our world. We walk along the shore every morning, grateful for the fresh air and the chance to start a new day. Life is a beautiful journey, and I am glad I am on it with my family. I often think about the other victims of predators like Beatrice and Andrew. My heart goes out to them, to the families who didn't get their resurrection. I hope our story gives them hope, or at least the courage to keep looking for the truth. Justice is out there, even if it's hidden behind a veil of lies. You just have to be brave enough to pull the veil back and look. Final thought for anyone listening: never ignore your gut feeling. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't be afraid to ask questions, to dig deeper, to stand up for yourself. You have the power to change your story, to be the hero of your own life. Trust in love, trust in justice, and never, ever give up. You are stronger than you think, and the world needs your light to shine. I am Mary. I am a survivor. I am a mother. I am a grandmother, and I am finally, truly free. The sunset over the coast is beautiful tonight, a riot of colors that promises a bright tomorrow. I close my eyes and listen to the waves, a rhythm that tells me everything is going to be all right. Thank you for listening to my journey. Stay strong and remember, love always wins in the end.